In the beginning, the Northland was barren and devoid of Presbyterian churches.
But a spirit of change, of hope and joy,
A spirit filled with the love of God and the love for the Northland community.
hovered above the wilderness.
In the beginning, there were 7 brave couples.
Mr. and Mrs. Charles Bixler,
Mr. and Mrs. John Crabb,
Mr. and Mrs. James Fredman,
Mr. and Mrs. Earl Johannes,
Mr. and Mrs. Marvin Matthews,
Mr. and Mrs. Charles Platt.
Mr. and Mrs. Glenn Schooley,
These 7 couples were chosen by the Spirit
to begin what we now know as
St. Luke's Presbyterian Church.
They were men and women of great faith, courage, and righteousness.
They were true warriors for Christ.
They were the founding fathers of an almighty institution that would grow into
The greatest Presbyterian church in the world.
Excuse me, coming through. Do pardon the dramatic, folks. It seems my colleagues here have gotten a bit carried away.
What do you mean carried away? That's what happened, right?
7 couples came together at this very spot and started
The greatest Presbyterian church in the world.
Right. Let me bring you two back down to earth. First of all, in the beginning was only 1957. Secondly, I don't think you can really call Kansas City a wilderness. At least not at that time. Shall we do this the right way?
Oh, fine.
If you insist.
Then get rid of the silly costumes and dramatics. You're scaring the children.
How else are we going to tell the story of the greatest Presbyterian church in the world?
We shall tell the story sensibly and from the beginning. In the summer of 1956, a site was purchased for a new Presbyterian church. It would be located on the old 10-acre homestead of Mr. and Mrs. S.J. Carey at 4301 Northeast Vivian Road. Mr. and Mrs. Carey were filled with delight that a new church would be established in their former home.
Boring.
7 couples came together to organize a committee to establish the new church. They voted to hold the first worship service on February 3rd, 1957. They expected 40 people.
But instead, over 100 people came.
Soon thereafter, it would become
St. Luke Presbyterian Church, a fine, dignified, and somber institution.
You know the people of this church? They are not somber.
they're filled with the joy of the Lord.
Yeah, did you read the front of the church?
J-O-Y.
Joy!
Soon thereafter, the church would grow in numbers.
And in the joy of the Lord.
Okay, and in the joy of the Lord. They would establish a church choir, Sunday school classes, women's association, and even a bowling.
I can picture it all now.
Wally Carson preaching,
Moving the podium all over everywhere.
the choir sitting in the stairs,
Where else would they sit?
the Sunday school that met in the kitchen,
The kids sat on the counters and even in the kitchen sink.
Finally, St. Luke acquired enough signatures on the charter to officially establish the church.
But first they wanted to fix up the old homestead a bit.
while the women were giving the house a feminine touch.
The men laid a cement floor in the garage and constructed 2 classrooms.
I remember it like it was just
yesterday.
I told you we should have come back to check on this floor earlier.
I won that last hand.
Probably the best game of bridge you've ever played.
We better start leveling this cement. It's already setting up.
Hurry, we don't want the floor to be lumpy.
But it was lumpy. Oh well.
It was so cold in the basement that March that everyone wore hats, coats, and heavy sweaters.
But they
Had
had
2 new Sunday school rooms.
August 25th, 1957, 100 people had signed the charter. September 22nd, 1957, St. Luke was formally recognized by the Presbyterian Church. March 2nd, 1958, Reverend Wallace Carlson was formally installed as the first pastor of St. Luke Presbyterian Church. Within the next 2 months, St. Luke would begin plans for a new chapel. They had already outgrown the little 2-story house.
And
There was no room at the inn.
Wrong story.
Sorry.
1 year later, ground was broken for the new building. It was an exciting time for St. Luke Presbyterian Church.
Not the way you tell it.
I think
The
that
guy in the front row is falling asleep.
I saw that woman over there yawn.
Church history is important to everyone.
But it doesn't have to be boring.
The early church services were quite lively.
Sure were.
What do you mean?
Come on.
Don't tell me you've forgotten already.
The mice that used to frighten all the ladies.
Or how at the time someone upstairs flushed a toilet and water dripped all over Mabel Hamill's hat.
When the bee landed on Pastor Wally when he was preaching.
Many St. Luke traditions began in the early years of the church.
Like potluck suppers.
The traditional Easter brunch began in 1957.
The menu was fruit cups, hot cross buns, cinnamon rolls, coffee, and cocoa.
The church newsletter began in November of 1957.
Church
Members read Dr. Luke prescribes and the this and that column every week in the comfort of their own homes.
The first candlelight service, the first VBS, and it all began in the early years of St. Luke.
Don't forget the Cub Scouts and Boy Scout troops.
So you see, many of St. Luke traditions originate in the first year of the church.
Like the Women's Association.
I remember the time. And so we decided that a potluck supper would be coordinated by Mrs. Blixter and Mrs. Carson. We shall decorate in wonderful shades of... Eek! What in heaven's name?
Dottie, your purse!
It's in there. An alarm clock and a note. Dottie, dearest, this is your friendly reminder to end the Women's Association meeting on time. Uh-oh. I need the car so I can get to work on time. Your loving husband. Oh my, I'm late.
What a lively Women's Association.
Now where was I? Oh yes. On May 11, 1958, St. Luke elected a building committee to be chaired by Mr. James Redmond.
Once again, St. Luke's had grown too big for its britches.
The first Sunday in May 1959, ground was broken for the new chapel, fellowship hall, kitchen, and offices.
Every Sunday thereafter, the congregation would check up on the progress of the construction.
Until finally, on November 1st, 1959, the new facilities were dedicated.
This church, founded by 7 ordinary couples just 2 years prior, would grow in strength and in numbers.
And the joy of the Lord was on them all.
That is the story of the beginning of St. Luke Presbyterian Church.
And God looked down upon the church he established, and he declared,
It is good. And he said, These are my children in whom I am well pleased.
because all know St. Luke is
The greatest Presbyterian church in the